think it's you there.
In the time before the Elizabethan Poor Law had been enacted, Elizabethan England saw a major increase in poverty for many of its inhabitants. One of the main origins for poverty included England's poor harvest, and as the population increased, many left the land in search for jobs in the towns. The land desertion would also lead to an increase in poverty to not just the owners, but to those who worked for them as well. At that time, England was living in a hierarchical pyramid system, but those responsible for peasants chose to support royal funds instead of the poor in need. However, a predominant factor for England's poverty was the decline in religious value and morals. Before the Reformation, many Christians followed the instructions of the Bible as stated in Matthew chapter 25. It stated that all Christians shall feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, visit the sick, clothe the naked, visit the prisoner, and bury the dead. With all the factors occurring at the same time, poverty skyrocketed in England, which thus called a desperate plea to poor relief. The Elizabethan Poor Law was enacted after the Reformation and during the reign of Elizabeth I, and although it is referred to as the 1601 Poor Law, is in fact a combination of previous acts, also made to help lower the increasing rate of poverty in Elizabethan England. Starting in 1552, the Elizabethan government established a parish register extant from the church. The main function of the 1552 Act was to officially record the number of poor in a parish. Then in 1563, justices of the peace were commissioned to not only handle financial support of the poor, but also classify them into distinct categories. The first category was the deserving poor, whose main aid was known as outdoor relief. Those in this category were people who had the capabilities to work but could not find it. They received clothes, food, and sometimes money. Another group distinguished to be a deserving poor were those who were either too old, young, or ill to work. They received indoor relief, where they could receive shelter in almshouses, workhouses, or hospitals. Sometimes younger children not in the orphanages were given apprenticeships to tradesmen. The second category was the undeserving poor, which were those who could work but chose not to. They were usually idle beggars or chose to steal in order to survive. The poor in this category received no assistance, as they were all seen as criminals. They were thus whipped, or those continuing to beg were hanged. If they were lucky, they were sent to prison. In 1572, benefit for the poor seemed to grow in a local necessity. Justices of the peace from each parish were responsible for all deserving poor in their region. So, they introduced a poor rate in which all property owners in a parish must pay a collective tax to help in the poor relief. The 1572 Act also marked the first major public indifference to the Poor Law because all those who refused to pay faced imprisonment. The 1576 Act saw proposals for guaranteed work for poor in each town, and a workhouse for the deserving and a house of corrections for the undeserving. In 1597, the Justices of the Peace introduced the position of overseers of the poor. The overseers took a heavy authority over the poor relief in each parish. Their jobs were to regulate the poor rate, supervise all workhouses and houses of corrections, supervise ration dispensation, and collect taxes for each parish. Then, in 1601, all rulings were combined into a single Poor Relief Act. However, some developments were made. In refining the Elizabethan Poor Law, provisions were made to make each parish's poor rate compulsory, providing work materials, apprenticeships, relief for those who were deserving, and make parents and their children responsible for each other, and also decreed that each Easter 2 overseers would be elected to be unpaid and supervised by the Justices of the Peace for each parish. In the simplest form, the welfare system can be thought of as an institution that redistributes the allotment of resources from what would be the free market outcome. The redistribution might take form of money through the tax system in both the form of direct and indirect taxes, through tax credits, through welfare benefits, but also in the form of goods, education, food stamps, or health. For example, if the opportunity of education is provided free of charge to a person receiving the schooling, the cost for that education is met through the taxing of the general public. There are many forms which this redistribution takes. Welfare, titled unemployment insurance, provides for the people who have little to no money coming in their household because they are currently unemployed. Also, there is a workers' compensation, which provides cash to those who have no income because they are unable to work for their own money. There are many forms of welfare. The comparison between the Elizabethan Poor Law of 1601 and the American welfare system is overwhelming. Apart from the obvious age of the two laws, essentially there are no major differences. The similarities consist of one. Each system is designed to assist the poor who have, in a sense, a legitimate reason for why they need the assistance in one way or another. However, with the poor laws, they distinguish a deserving poor victim and an undeserving. Where in America presently welfare does not even test the applicants, and so the beggars who would be considered undeserving to Queen Elizabeth may be deserving in the current time. There is a strong comparison in regards to how the assistance is accumulated for people in need. Each is a sort of formal taxation for the people who are considered the middle class. And the 1601 Poor Laws did not affect the nobles, and welfare hardly affects the wealthy in today's society. It seems that the middle class is pulling most, if not all the weight in both situations. Also, it was the duty of the successful to take care of the more unsuccessful people. Recall back to the parishioner's duty. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty. Of course, presently there are no sounds that say this, but we are too being told that this is our duty and responsibility. Yet Queen Elizabeth and certainly not Obama are chipping in any wealth that they may have. The differences are quite obvious. There are no elected overseers that we pick every Easter like in Elizabethan times. Still, it seems today that every person in the middle class is the overseer to all of America. The entire concept of poor relief was seen by many to be a burden on the successful instead of helpful to the poor. But what we believed was poor relief is today's social welfare. This recycling of the Poor Relief Act, although it has different means of action, still has the same overall idea to aid the needy by help of the not. This topic can easily relate to the theme because it brings to light major indifference between a right and a responsibility. While many people see public assistance as a right, it doesn't necessarily mean it is to be done. What we are being forced to believe is that it is our responsibility to provide benefactors to those who are unable to themselves.